Rule 1 is simple. Dead people don't breathe. I broke that rule once. The mop head slides through a thin line of dried blood on the tile in front of cooler 7. The floor is clean, quiet, and white under the fluorescent lights. Behind me, very close to my ear, something takes a long, slow breath in. Not a machine, not a compressor cycle, a breath. I freeze with the mop in my hands. My own lungs lock for a second. I don't turn around yet. I just listen. Nothing. Just the low hum from the refrigeration line in the wall. I should have stopped right there. 48 hours before that breath, it was just another night in the basement morgue of a county hospital in Ohio. The hallway outside is empty after 11 p.m. The elevator chimes once every 30 minutes when someone from ICU sends a body down. Inside, the air sits at 38 degrees. The cold hits first in the cheeks, then the fingers, even through gloves. Condensation beads on the stainless doors of the walk-in coolers. It gathers in slow drops and runs down into the rubber gaskets. One fluorescent tube over the prep table flickers every few seconds. Maintenance says it's fine. They never change it. My job is basic. I am not a doctor. I am not the pathologist. I receive the bags. I check the tags. I log the times into a cheap desktop with a sticky spacebar. I roll the gurneys in. I wipe down the tables with hospital-grade bleach. I clear cavity fluid that leaks when someone rushed a closure upstairs. The gurney wheels complain on the cracked tiles every time I hit the same joint near the drain. The sound is sharp and familiar. You stop hearing it after a few years. What you never stop noticing is the smell. Old blood in the floor drains holds a sweet metallic odor that bleach never fully erases. It clings to the back of your throat. Body bags balloon a little when we wheel them under the warm surgery lamp for paperwork. The air inside expands. The plastic lifts, then settles when you move them back to the cold. We joke about it on night shift. He's taking one last breath. Dark humor keeps people from quitting. Most people. Cooler 7 has its own sound. When you open the door, the rubber gasket along the frame gives off a soft hiss. It's long and thin like air slipping between teeth. The first week I worked down here, it bothered me. Now I tell myself the same thing every time. Pressure equalizing. That's it. That night we were short one attendant on swing shift. A male body from ICU had been held upstairs for a while. Paperwork delays, next of kin issues. He finally came down on the elevator a little after 1 in the morning. I met the nurse at the doors. We did the usual handoff. Toe tag, ID band, time of death, cause listed in quick letters that only really mean something to the doctors. I scanned the barcode on his tag. The little handheld beeped once. I keyed him into the system. Location basement morgue cooler, 7-second shelf. He was heavier than he looked. Most of them are. The gurney wheels shook over the broken tile near the drain. The zipper on the black bag rattled with each bump. Inside the cooler, the temperature display read 37.9 degrees. Within range. I slid his gurney into the rack, locked the wheels, and swung the heavy door shut. As the gasket caught the bag inside, lifted for a second. The plastic rose and swelled across the chest area. Only an inch or two, but enough to catch my eye. Then the door latched with a dull clunk and the bag deflated. Warm air trapped in the plastic, I told myself. Hallway air mixing with cold air. Normal. I still glanced back twice on my way out. Something was already wrong. 2 hours later, the hospital had gone quiet. No code calls, no new arrivals, just the steady hum of the compressors and the tick of the clock on the office wall near the sign-in sheet. I did what I always do around 3 in the morning. I filled a mop bucket with hot water and bleach, rolled it out, and started on the far end of the room. Visual first. You scan the tiles ahead of you for dried spots, footprints, wheel tracks, anything red or brown, then you move. Straight lines. Overlap each pass by a few inches so you don't miss a strip. The air felt colder than usual that night. It pressed against the exposed skin around my eyes. My breath left small clouds that faded fast. The compressors cycled off. For a moment, the whole room went still. No hum. No distant elevator bell. No overhead page from upstairs leaking through the vents. Just my mop sliding on wet tile. The faint squeak of the handle in my gloved hands. I was about 6 feet from Cooler 7 when it happened. A breath pushed the air against the back of my neck. Long, slow, heavy. It did not sound like gas escaping from a line. It did not sputter or click. It drew in. Then it let go. My hands clenched on the mop handle. The bucket wheels rattled once as I stopped short. For 2 full seconds, I did not move. I heard the water in the bucket slosh settle. I heard a drip fall from the mop head back into the mix of bleach and whatever had been on the floor before. I did not hear the compressors. I turned around. The bags on the other gurneys lay flat and dull under the overhead light. No movement. No sound. The door of Cooler 7 sat closed. Condensation lined the edge in a broken ring of droplets. As I watched, the center of the door flexed almost imperceptibly inward. The gasket around it answered with a drawn-out cheek, pulling tight as the pressure inside shifted. That hiss had always sounded close to a breath on bad nights. Right then, it sounded exact. The hair along my arms rose under the sleeves of my scrubs. I tightened my jaw until it ached. Zipper track, I told myself out loud. My voice sounded thin in the cold room, just air from the bag. I waited for the compressors to kick back on so I could blame the noise on them, so I could file the breath away under something mechanical and dull. They stayed silent. The only sound in the room was the soft drip of water from the mop back into the bucket and the faint echo of that breath in my head. I should have walked out then. I didn't. I dipped the mop back into the bucket, wrung it once, and went back to work in front of Cooler 7. Every stroke of the handle felt heavier. Every time the mop slid past that door, I kept my eyes straight ahead. I told myself I would log a note about the gasket in the maintenance book when my shift ended. I never wrote it down. The next night, when I came back on that same cooler and that same body were waiting for me. And the breathing hadn't stopped. The next night, the breathing was still there. I was back on shift in the same basement morgue in Ohio. Same gray tile. Same stainless steel. Same Cooler 7. I pushed the yellow mop bucket out from the janitor closet. The water steamed in the cold air. The bleach smell cut through the sweet metal from the drains. I started at the far end of the room again. Mop down, pull back, quarter turn, repeat. The overhead lights hummed. The compressors behind the cooler wall ran at a low, steady tone. The temperature panel on the main unit read 38 degrees. I stopped the mop in the middle of a stroke to adjust my grip. Behind me, from the direction of Cooler 7, something exhaled. Long, slow, one breath. I did not move for 3 seconds. I started mopping again. As soon as the handle slid, the breathing stopped. I told myself it was a coincidence. I tested it again 10 feet closer to the coolers. Mop moving. No breath. Mop still. One breath. It kept doing that. That was the moment I knew this was a pattern. For a few nights I pretended it was not happening. I stuck to my routine. Bodies in, bodies logged, floors cleaned, tables wiped. Every time I walked past Cooler 7, I checked the digital display. 38 degrees. Sometimes 37.8. Always in range. There were no alarms. No error codes on the control panel. No frost buildup around the door that would explain strange sounds. The man inside had been pronounced dead for over 12 hours by then. Rigor should have been in full swing. Limbs stiff at the joints, jaw set. Livor mortis should have settled along his back and sides. Blood pooled by gravity. No circulation. Dead is dead. But every time I stopped moving within 10 feet of that door, there was that same slow breath. It never synced with the compressors. The compressors cycled on and the breath ignored them. The compressors cycled off and the breath kept its own schedule. I started counting seconds under my breath. 3 seconds of silence. Exhale. 3 seconds of silence. Exhale. It never missed. I should have written it in the log. The first time I felt the warmth, I was alone again. It was just before 4 in the morning. We had moved 3 new cases in, 2 elderly, 1 overdose. I had to shift the man in cooler 7 down a shelf to make room. I opened the door. A sheet of cold air rolled over my face. The smell of cold plastics and stored blood met me. The bag with his body lay on the second rail. Condensation dotted the plastic around the chest area. I pulled the gurney lock, slid him out halfway, and stopped him level with my waist. With my left hand, I steadied the bag right over his sternum. My glove touched the plastic. The surface should have been cold and firm. Most of the time, the chest feels flat by that point. This spot felt warm, not hot, not feverish, just several degrees above the rest of the bag, enough that I noticed the difference through nitrile and scrub fabric. I pressed in with 2 fingers. The tissue under the plastic did not give the way dead tissue should. It pushed back. There was tone under my hand. I had pressed on thousands of chests, on fresh ICU transfers with a time of death measured in minutes, on bodies 8, 10, 12 hours out. This felt closer to the first group. I pulled my hand back fast. I heard my own breath hitch in my throat. I checked the toe tag again. Same name, same time of death, same attending doctor. I slid him the rest of the way in and shut the door. The gasket hissed around the frame. It sounded way too much like a sigh. Something was very wrong. I needed to rule out my imagination. So I started testing the room. One night I rolled a portable suction unit over to the deep sink. The suction canister still had a ring of dried blood in the bottom. I filled it halfway with warm water and bleach. I turned on the vacuum and watched the foam rise in the clear tubing. I shut it off and let the foam settle into a still layer. Then I walked to the middle of the room. I stood there and waited. The compressors were on. The lights were steady. From cooler 7, a slow breath came through the door. At the same moment, the bleach foam in the suction canister shivered. Not a big jump, just a small vibration that broke the surface. I walked closer to the sink and watched again. I stopped 3 steps from the canister and 3 steps from cooler 7. Silence. Another breath. The foam trembled again. I moved the canister to the other side of the room. I ran a fresh suction line. I did the same test. 3 times. Each time when the breath came, the foam reacted. There is no air line from the cooler to the sink. There is no vent that connects that door to that tube. The foam moved anyway. I clenched my jaw until my teeth hurt. That was when I realized the breath was not just in the air. It was in the room. The drainage tubing was next. We had to clear some residual fluid from the bag. Standard procedure after an autopsy if anything leaks. I hung a fresh length of clear tubing from the rail. I attached one end to a collection bottle. I slid the other end under the zipper at the bottom corner of the bag. The room temperature was 38 degrees. The body inside had been in the cooler more than a day. Nothing inside that bag should have been producing warm vapor. I stood there with my hand on the clamp watching the tubing. At first, nothing happened. The plastic hung limp and clear. Then a breath came from cooler 7. The section of tubing just above the zipper clouded over with a thin layer of fog. It held for a second, then it cleared. I opened the clamp and let a small amount of fluid drain, yellow and red thin with a little clot. Normal. I closed the clamp and waited. Silence. Breath. Fog again. I checked the temperature display on the cooler. 37.9 degrees. No spike. No alarm. Whatever was causing that vapor was not enough to move the sensors. I moved my hand along the tubing and felt the plastic. Cold. The only warm zone was that little band near the zipper. I pulled my hand away fast. My fingers felt wrong. I should have called the pathologist that night. I didn't. It did not stay in the hospital. I started waking up at home around 3 in the morning. No alarm, no noise. Just wide awake in the dark. I would lie there and count the seconds in my head. 3 seconds. Then, in the air of my quiet bedroom in Columbus, I would swear I heard a faint exhale. I told myself it was the HVAC unit cycling. My girlfriend did not think that far. One morning she looked at me over coffee. "You keep holding your breath in your sleep," she said. "What are you listening for? I'm fine," I told her. It was the only answer I had. The next night, I stood in the shower with the water off for a full 30 seconds. I watched the drain. I heard a soft breath come up from that hole in the middle of my bathroom floor. Same timing, same length. It followed me home. I tried to tell one person at work. On day shift, there is an older attendant who has been in the morgue for more than 20 years. He taught me half of what I know. I waited until we were alone at the sign-in desk. "There's something off about cooler 7, I said. He shrugged. "Gasket's old." "It's not just the gasket," I said. "He keeps breathing." He laughed once. "Postmortem gas. Happens all the time. You're overthinking it." I wanted to push back. Instead, I signed my name on the sheet and went to change. That was my frustration point. I realized no one was going to take this as more than a joke. So I stopped talking about it. I made one more attempt with someone higher up. On a Friday night right before midnight, the breath had been loud enough that I heard it over the compressor. I picked up the phone on the wall and called the charge nurse upstairs. "Can you come down here for a second?" I asked. "What's wrong? I need a second set of ears." She came down 5 minutes later. Scrubs, badge, tired eyes. We stood 10 feet from cooler 7. I waited. Nothing. No breath, no hiss. Only the normal hum from the equipment. It was louder than the compressor, I said. She watched me for a moment. "You've been doing a lot of nights," she said. "Maybe take a long weekend." Then she left. As soon as the elevator doors closed upstairs, the breath started again. The midpoint came on a rebagging. He had been in the same bag for a while. Some fluid had pooled at one corner. The liner pad needed replacing. It was just after 2 in the morning. The cooler read 38 degrees. The room was empty. I rolled his gurney out of cooler 7 and parked it under the overhead lamp. The light hit the black plastic and showed the outlines of shoulders, chest, and abdomen. I unzipped the bag down to mid-chest. The smell of preserved tissue and old blood rose up. It was strong, but not fresh. The Y-incision on his torso had been sutured tight. Dark stitches crossed pale skin from both shoulders down to the sternum, and then straight to the lower abdomen. Those stitches should have been still. They were not. The skin along the line lifted a fraction of an inch. Then it fell. Then it lifted again. Small movement, regular timing, not an arm twitch, not a random muscle jump, a rhythm. I stared for a full cycle. My hand shook once on the edge of the bag. I reached over to the side tray and picked up the old Littman stethoscope we keep there. Cold metal, black tubing. I pressed the diaphragm gently along the stitched line, not over the chest cavity, directly over the sealed incision. I held my breath and listened. I did not hear heart sounds. No lub-dub, no valve noise. I heard air moving through fluid. A wet pull in, a wet push out, inside a space that should not have been used for breathing. I stepped back from the table. My gloves squeaked against the plastic. My back hit the edge of the second gurney. Whatever is breathing in there, I said barely above a whisper, isn't using lungs anymore. Isn't using lungs anymore. That line would not leave my head. I still had to go back to work. Bills don't care what you hear in a morgue. A week after that rebagging, I was back in the same basement in Ohio. Same cooler 7, same name on the chart, same time of death in the system. The breathing hadn't stopped. I decided I needed proof. It was just after 2 in the morning. The hallway outside the morgue was empty. The elevator panel showed all floors idle. Inside, the temperature monitor read 38 degrees. Compressors on. Constant low hum. I stood just inside the doorway to the cooler room. No breath. I took 5 slow steps toward cooler 7. My shoes squeaked once on the tile. Still nothing. I marked my spot on the floor with my eyes. Then I backed up until my shoulder hit the door frame. One more step forward. The breath came as soon as my foot crossed that invisible line. Slow, deep, wet now. I stepped back again. Silence. Forward. Breath. I did that 3 times. Same result. I should have left then. I pulled the chart from the wall by the cooler. His name, his age, cause of death. Time called by the attending. I looked at the letters until they blurred. Then I tried something stupid. I held the chart in one hand and whispered his last name. The exhale that came through the door sounded like an answer. Not louder, not softer, just timed right after I said it. I swallowed. My jaw clenched so hard it clicked. I gripped the edge of the door with one hand and pressed my other palm flat against the plastic over his sutured chest. Stop, I said. My voice came out low. The breathing stopped. Not a slow fade, not a mechanical spin down. It just cut off. The compressors kept humming in the wall. My own breathing sounded too loud in my ears. I waited. 10 seconds. 15. Nothing. I pulled my hand away. The next breath didn't come until I stepped back again. That was the moment I knew it was aware of me. A few days later, the hospital scheduled preventive maintenance on the main refrigeration system. They do it twice a year, usually on day shift. This time, it rolled over into my hours. The tech from facilities warned me before he shut it down. Unit will be off about 20 minutes, he said. You'll still have insulation. Don't open the doors unless you have to. Got it, I said. He killed the power to the main compressor. The hum that had been in the background for every shift of my life down there went silent. No fan noise, no condenser noise, no elevator movement. Just the buzz from the overhead lights and my own heartbeat. I could hear every drip from the prep sink, every small shift of plastic as the cold air inside the coolers relaxed. And under that, I heard it. The breathing from cooler 7 came back deeper now. Without the compressors, I could hear the moisture in it. It sounded like air pulling through fluid-filled space. Each exhale ended with a faint rattle against metal. I stepped closer to the cooler. The stainless table in front of it trembled just enough that a clamp on the edge vibrated. No power to the unit. No fan running. The table moved in time with the breath. I rested my fingertips on the edge of the steel. The vibration went through the gloves into my bones. Nothing in that room should have been able to shake the table like that. I should have walked upstairs right then. The night everything broke, the compressors didn't come back on at all. It was a Sunday shift. only one new case from the ER. The rest of the racks were full but stable. At around 1:30 a.m., the temperature alarm on the main panel beeped. The number climbed from 38 to 40 degrees, then 41. I called facilities. "Unit's not cycling back on," I said. "We're short tonight," the guy said. "I can be there in 30. "Temps are rising," I said. He hesitated. "If it hits 43, open the doors and check the bodies. You know the drill." I hung up and watched the numbers. 41.5, 42, 42.8. We try to keep remains between 34 and 39 degrees. Too warm for too long means faster decomposition. At 43, I grabbed my key ring. "Check them," I told myself. "Just check them." I started at cooler 1. Open door, quick visual. Tags in place, no obvious purge, no unusual swelling. Close door. Move to the next. The room felt wrong without the cold air pushing at me. My scrubs didn't chill the way they should. The tile didn't bite at my feet. By the time I reached cooler 5, the temperature alarm chirped again. 43.2. I skipped 6. I went straight to 7. My hand shook once on the handle. I took a breath of my own, trying to steady it. I pulled the door open. No compressor noise greeted me. Just a wall of damp stored cold. It rolled out around my legs. The black bag on the middle rail was not flat. It rose in a rounded shape across the chest and upper abdomen. Then it fell. Then it rose again. Slow. Even. I stepped closer. This was not gas expanding once. This was not a single release of trapped air. This was inhale. Exhale. I watched the zipper line move up and down in a steady rhythm. My throat went dry. I reached out and put 3 fingers on the center of the bag. The plastic lifted under my hand, then dropped. I felt the movement through the glove. It was not a twitch. It was a full chest motion, controlled and smooth. "This isn't possible," I said. I didn't believe myself anymore. I slid my fingers along the zipper until I found the metal tab near the upper chest. It was cold from the air. I wrapped my hand around the tab. The breathing continued. In, out, in, out. I yanked the zipper an inch, just enough for air to move if there was any pressure. The breathing stopped. The room went silent. Even the small sounds from the other coolers seemed to hold. I waited. 1 second. 2. 3. Nothing. The stillness in that space felt focused. I realized I was holding my own breath. I let it out in a short, shaky exhale. Right when I did, I heard something under my hand. Not air escaping, not a release of gas. It felt like the body inside the bag had tightened. The plastic pulled inward as if the chest underneath had locked in place, like it was holding its breath. It stayed that way as long as my fingers were on the zipper. The thought came into my head in plain, flat words. It knows I'm here. That was the moment I hesitated. If I opened the bag, I didn't know what I would see. Not a heart restarting, not a patient waking up. Something else. I let go of the zipper. The plastic lifted again. The breath that came out then was slow and deliberate, like someone letting me know they had waited me out. I backed away so fast I hit the opposite table. A tray of instruments rattled. Forceps, scissors, a bone saw attachment in its case. I didn't pick any of it up. I turned and walked out. Then I ran. I took the stairs 2 at a time, up to the main floor. My hands shook when I handed my badge to the security guard outside administration. "I'm done," I said. He frowned. "You can't just leave your post, man." "I'm not going back down there," I said. "Ever." They called the night supervisor in human resources. She sat me in a small room with beige walls and a plastic plant. "What happened?" she asked. I looked at the badge in my hand one last time. Then I slid it across the table. Because down there, I said, I can't tell the difference between a machine cycle and a man trying to breathe with no lungs. She watched me for a long second. I'm marking this as stress, she said. That was the only word they put in my file. 6 months passed. I took a job in a warehouse outside Columbus. Night shift again. Forklifts, pallets, cardboard boxes, no bodies. I still woke up around 3 a.m. most nights. I still counted to 3 in the dark, waiting to hear a breath that shouldn't be there. One evening, my phone rang while I was eating in my car. Unknown number, hospital area code. I almost let it go to voicemail. I answered on the 3rd ring. Hello, is this Daniel? A man's voice asked. Yes. This is facilities from County General, he said. We've been doing some work in the morgue. My chest tightened. Okay, we found your old ID badge, he said. It was inside cooler 7, under one of the body trays. I haven't been there in 6 months, I said. I figured you'd want it back, he said. We tagged the unit out of service. There were notes about unusual condensation in that door. Persistent hissing too, even after we replaced the gasket last year. My hand was sweating around the phone. I switched it to the other ear. Yeah, I said. I remember the door. On the line, I heard him shuffle some papers. You still there? He asked. Yeah, I said. Right after that very faint under his voice, I heard it. 3 seconds of nothing. Then one slow, rhythmic exhale. It wasn't coming from his end of the conversation. It wasn't room noise. It sounded exactly like the breath that had followed me around that basement. In, out, in, out. He kept talking, but I wasn't listening anymore. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at the hospital's number on the screen. I ended the call without saying goodbye. They can keep the badge. They replaced the gasket last year. But whatever's in that cooler still knows my name. If you stayed with me all the way to the end, you already know more than most people ever will about what happens after the doors close in a morgue. If this story stayed with you, even a little, go ahead and hit like so the algorithm knows you want more. If you've heard something like this, or if you think you know what that breathing really was, drop a comment. I read every theory, even the ones that keep me up at night. And if you want to come back for the next case I shouldn't be telling, subscribe and keep the little bell on. I don't post often. But when I do, it's because something won't leave me alone. Share this with someone who thinks they understand death. Most people don't.